Ladies and gentlemen, another character in HSR analysis time. We're looking at Mrs. Pela, or Pela, or I'm assuming it's Pela. Well, regardless of what her name is, she's our first Nihility character, which I'm excited to get into because I like the role of Nihility, which is a debuffer. Debuffers are very important, and seeing as this is the first debuffer we're covering, she's probably going to be the best in her role, but debuffers are an extremely important unit to have in your party as well. They debuff the enemies. It's quite a simple and straightforward concept. So, let's get into it, eh? So, deal ice damage. She's an obviously ice character. I didn't mention that, but she's ice. The elements don't really matter these days, from my perspective. There's no reaction, so that's why I don't mention the elements too crazily. But she's ice, and her first little basic attack deals ice damage to a singular enemy. All the characters' basic percentages are the same. Pretty good. I like the consistency. But her skill removes one debuff, baseline, no strings attached, and deals ice damage to a decent degree of Pela's attack to a single target enemy. So, very good. Debuff removal is what you want, but obviously that's not a debuffing. It is technically debuffing, but I think generally how people view debuffing is to put a debuff on the enemy that reduces their stats, and not so much removing stats, buffs, but regardless, whatever. You remove a buff and deal a bit of damage, and then her ultimate is deal ice damage equal to a certain percentage of Pela's attack to all enemies, so it's a bit of AoE, with a base chance of 100% to inflict exposed status. Exposed enemies have their defense reduced by a pretty chunky amount of percent for 2 turns. So actually really good. Exposed, you probably want to run an effect hit build to a certain degree just to make sure that this 100% base chance actually stays near 100% with all of the different effect resistances or effect hit resistances happening on different enemies. So you're really going to want to be applying this exposed thing, reducing defense, because, well, a 43% reduction is a lot of percent. Moving on though, her talent, if Pela attacks, inflicts a debuff on the enemy, she additionally gains 5, 10, or 11 energy. So when you inflict a debuff, you gain energy back. Now, here's the interesting part. If her burst hits every enemy on the field, and if her burst applies exposed status to every enemy on the field at the same time, will that count as one enemy being afflicted with a debuff, or will that count as each separate enemy being afflicted with a debuff? Because you could come into a really cool play where you kind of have an infinite cycle of her ultimate. If you go enough effect hit rate, a guarantee afflicted, and then every enemy that you do inflict gives you individually 11 energy per se. You could kind of go into this infinite cycle of using her ultimate to always have the enemies debuffed, which sounds very great if you actually could get to that point, because it would be a very specific build, obviously. So I'm very keen to know that, but regardless, when you inflict a debuff onto an enemy, you gain some energy. And then her technique, Initiator. Start the battle, Pela deals ice damage and to a random enemy with 100% base chance of lowering the defense of all enemies by 20%. It's not as strong as her ultimate, but you could actually use this one to start the fight, as the enemies will have a 20% defense reduction for 2 turns. So I wouldn't actually, be less inclined to recommend this one over something like a main DPS hunt characters one. So this is a pretty good one. And that's that. Traces, Pela deals 20% more damage to debuffed enemies. It's kind of not really going in line with the Nihility debuffer style, but you deal more damage to debuffed enemies, so it's fine. Trace 2, when Pela is on the battlefield, all allies' effect hit rate is increased by 10%. This is actually fucking phenomenal. If you're going for a dot build on certain characters, if you're going for, well, playing with Pela on the team, she'll have 10% effect hit rate increase. Jeez, what a weird thing to say. She'll have a 10% increase, and then, just any character that applies some sort of debuff. You can even run 2 Nihility characters if you really wanted to, for a lot of different effects. And then, obviously, Trace 3 is using a skill to remove a debuff, increases the damage of Pela's next attack by 20%. So, from her base kit, here's what I've gathered, and here's how I'm looking at it, is that Pela is a Nihility character. She's a debuffer, but she's also equally a kind of DPS. Because there's a lot of her kit so far that is pretty high percentages, like going up to 264, sorry, is not a low percentage. 151 on all AoE damage, that's not a low percentage, but she also has the extra bonus of debuffing and removing buffs. and also buffing her damage to these specifically debuffed characters, or after removing a debuff, she like buffs herself. So she's kind of a debuffer, but also at the same time equally a DPS, which is, I'm not sure if that's going to be super valuable, because usually, in my honest opinion, when I want a debuffing character, I only want a debuffing character, because the debuffs that they can provide are so strong. And I'll use an example of something like a Bennett in Genshin Impact. He's a buffer character. Pretty much you only use him to buff. He doesn't really do damage if you build him as a buff character. So, and he'll buff like there's no fucking tomorrow. So I'm looking for that a bit more in at least this character, but regardless, my personal views aside, really good with a lot of the stuff that I'm reading from her base kit, but obviously enhanced through Eidolons. Eidolon 1, when an enemy is defeated, Pela gains energy. Just naturally, no matter when the enemy is defeated, if they're defeated by Pela, if they're not defeated by Pela, Pela will just gain energy, which is fucking ridiculously good, actually. If you're doing long string runs, like let's say some sort of abyss mechanic where you go run after run after run, enemies after enemy, this is actually really fucking good. Eidolon 2, after using Pela's skill to remove a buff, her speed is increased by 10% for 2 turns. Really good again, speed increase if you remove a buff, and you really do want to be removing buffs as soon as possible, and as quickly as possible, because, well, don't have the enemies be buffed, and you'll have an easy time, question mark. Eidolon 3, skill plus 2 and basic attack plus 1, that's fine. Eidolon 4, after Pela uses her ultimate, all enemies receive 50% more toughness damage from corresponding types for 2 turns. Now, what does that mean? Because we haven't really heard these terms in the previous analyses. Now, I don't really know, but my assumption just through the context clues that I'm given. So after she uses her ultimate, enemies will receive 50% more toughness damage. Well, toughness damage, seeing as it mentions types here, is going to indicate the weakness breaking kind of damage that you deal to the white shield on the enemies. That's what I believe this is, which is really good, by the way. This Eidolon is actually pretty fucking good, in my opinion. But that's what it's going to increase, is going to increase how quickly you break the white shield, depending on what element you're using. So you obviously, if the enemy's like needs wind to have their shield broken, you're going to have to use wind. It's not going to make the other elements too crazily more effective, because obviously it does say from corresponding types. So you're going to have to be very, very specific with it. But regardless, it's just going to increase your efficacy when breaking the shields or breaking the weaknesses, which is great. Eidolon 5, ultimate plus 2 and basic attack plus 1. It's fine. And then Eidolon 6, when Pela attacks a debuffed enemy, she deals an additional ice damage equal to 8% of Pela's attack to the enemy. Again, not an incredible one, like not one that I would recommend anyone go for. Eidolon 6, weirdly enough, with the Eidolon 6 is just kind of like even on the support characters, it's kind of like a weird chase for like DPS. I'm not sure why. Maybe they don't want to make the character too good at supporting. But we noticed that with Natasha, she just gets a damage increase essentially to her auto attack with her C6. And same thing with Pela here, is that when she attacks a debuffed enemy, regardless of the debuff, by the way, regardless of the debuff, she just deals more damage to them, which is fine. I'm not going to complain about, a bit more damage, but it's just a bit weird that the support characters don't have like a fundamentally supporting ultimate. Oh, sorry, Eidolon 6, my bad, Eidolon 6. I would have preferred an Eidolon 6 to be a bit more supportive, but again, my preferences aside, let's move on to the light cones. Light cones are a bit more of an interesting one. So where are we? Where's Nihility here? There we go, Nihility. So start at the 3 stars. Loop. Imagine, Loop increases damage dealt from the wearers to slowed enemy by a certain percentage. You don't slow the enemy, so there's no point in this one. It's a bit more of a specific debuff to have, so not really that recommended. Void at the beginning of battle, increase the wearer's effect hit rate by a certain percentage. You've got limited time to apply your debuffs and have a high % chance of applying your debuffs. Again, not recommended. Out of these two, which one would I recommend? Probably Void. But again, neither of these two are really good for Pela specifically, so avoid using these at all cost. Going into the 4 stars, Eyes of the Prey increases the effect hit rate of the wearer by a certain percentage and increases the dot damage over time by another certain percentage. So this is a bit more for build or dots that actually deal damage. From what I can tell, Pela doesn't deal dots that deal damage. Exposed is defense reduction. Her technique is a defense reduction. And she also applies toughness. This stuff here, all enemies receive toughness damage or more toughness damage. It doesn't even have a specific name. It's just a thing. So This is a bit more for Nihility characters that deal dot damage, not so much just put on debuffs. So not this one either. Eyes of Prey, no go. Good night and sleep well. Looks like it's Pela specific, so for every debuff that the target has, the damage dealt by the wearer increases by a certain percentage, take up to 3 times. This effect also applies to dot. Honestly, I'm kind of curious about the actual specific wording of dot in this context. This effect also applies to dot, so I'm assuming it just the same effects, you know, are applied to dot damage, like damage over time effect. They probably should, instead of using the actual term dot in this, at least on Pride one, probably say damage over time effects, so you can actually kind of grasp it, because applies to dot is not necessarily good. But regardless, essentially, so if Pela has this on, and then whenever she afflicts an enemy with a debuff, she'll gain a damage increase stacking up to 3 times, so at max that's a lot of percentage. As well, if you're a bleed character or a burn character that's a Nihility character, then you can use this. You'll also, your dot damage that you apply with your dot will actually gain this effect as well, on top of your other damage that you deal through the rest of your kit. So this one may be actually pretty good for, like, let's say if you want to run one of these other characters over here, Sampo maybe. I believe that's Sampo, I could be wrong. Maybe that'll be good on him, who knows, but this is so far the best one for Mrs. Pela. But going on to the next one, we will meet again after the wearer uses a basic attack or skill. The wearer deals X amount of damage as additional damage to rate of enemy that is attacked by abilities. Just don't use this one. Just don't use it. It's not that great. You're just dealing flat amounts of damage, and you're a Nihility character, so you want to be having some sort of buffing effect or debuffing effect to the enemies. So I wouldn't recommend this one. But, as we always do, if you want to make Pela the best character in the game, you've only got one choice really here. And if you want to make her the greatest character in the game, your favorite character, Pela is your go-to gal when you go to any kind of game mode. You're going to probably want to use this one. Increase the wearer's damage to debuffed enemies by an X percentage. And then when the wearer uses their skill, the effect hit rate of this attack increases by a certain percentage, and attack increases by a certain percentage. Well, will you want to use this one? It's kind of up and down, really. You deal a lot more damage to debuffed enemies. My nose is fucking with me. Oh god, this is terrible. You're going to do increased damage, but the thing is, Pela doesn't actually have a debuff affliction on her skill, so there's no reason for the skill effect hit rate for this attack to be increased, for Pela specifically. This is more likely a thing for Mr. Welt Yang. You're going to want this one on him, but Pela doesn't apply one with her skill, so there's no real need for this one. You obviously do get an attack increase by a large percentage, but again, no real reason for this second percentage here, so I wouldn't recommend it. Go for Pela's signature. It's going to give you the easiest and most effective amount of value. It's just going to be there. The Nihility light cones aren't that great, I'll be honest with you. I haven't read anything here that is super interesting. That's just my opinion, I guess, but I guess the best one would be obviously Welt Yang's In the Name of the World. But that's obviously very specific to him, so we'll see how it goes. But yes, just for Pela, use her Good Night and Sleep Well little light cone here. That's the best one, in my opinion. Relic sets. Relic sets. You could go for a few here. Honestly, there's a bunch of choices that you have, in my opinion. Effect break, break effect. Okay, I'm saying it the wrong way. Break effect by 20%, Thief shooting meteor, and increase the wearer's break effect by 20 when the wearer inflicts weakness break on an enemy, regenerate energy. It's a bit more dependent on a few factors, so you're gonna have to have like the break effect occur. Obviously, you'll have increased rate, but you'll have to break effect with Pela to regenerate energy. So that's that one. You obviously could go for the Hunter of Glacial Forest, which is ice damage, and then ultimate increases your crit damage, because obviously she's a bit more of a DPS as well, so you could go for this one. It wouldn't be a bad choice in any way, shape, or form, as well. You'll just get damage out. Those are the two only ones, because everything else is kind of shit for Pela. She doesn't scale with any specific stat. So either go for Thief of Shooting Meteor and or Hunter of the Glacial Forest, my apologies. These two are the best ones. Damage is obviously the top one. Utility is obviously the bottom one. So, you know, you kind of dabble in what you have available and what you want to use her for. Planetary ornament-wise, it's a bit of a mixture as well at this point, isn't it? So you obviously can go for Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise, which is increase the wearer's effect hit rate by 10%, and meanwhile the wearer's attack increased by the amount of 25% of the effect hit rate up to a total of 25%. So its effect hit rate increase as well as attack increase by a certain percentage, which would be fine. That's obviously great. There's no wrong with that, so go for that one if you need it. And then the second one that I can recommend with a heart and actual not thinking that I'm wrong is Italia Kingdom of Banditry. So increase the wearer's effect, a break effect by 20% when the wearer's speed is higher, increases by an extra 28%. It's just a utility. Breaking the shield, breaking the weakness of the character is just what you really need in this game. So if you can have the Nihility Character cover that, that's great. So these two, Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise and Talia Kingdom of Banditry, the two I recommend. Now, one that I can see being useful, but just very, very minimally in certain situations, is Sprightly Von Whack. It's energy recharge with a speed requirement of 145 to get your action advanced by 50% upon starting combat. This is a bit more of an opener. If you want to get combat done, bam, smack, bang, quickety quick. If you want to get combat done out of the blue, you go for this one, because obviously, if you can start the fight, Pela goes first, and then she immediately applies her burst or ultimate effect, which is the defense reduction, and then you can immediately go in with your combos and your damage. Well, sounds great to me, right? So it's a very rare occasion that you want to use this one, and that's why I don't recommend it, but it is still a thing that can work. So go with either of those two, Pan-Galactic or Talia, but Sprightly Von Vac, maybe it's Von Vac. Oh, Von Vac. Go for that one if you kind of want to do a specific build. And that's the relics. For the relic sets, actually specifically, it was the ice damage 1/4 set or the break effect 4 set. Probably one of them is going to pull up ahead against the other, but that's fine. And then for the galactic thing, it was those two, Pan-Galactic or Talia, or Sprightly if you really want to. And that's been Talia. Talia? This is not, her name's not Talia. That's been Pela. Pela's character is quite interesting. Not what I expected from a Nihility character, so I probably won't end up liking this character a lot. I like Nihility characters that are just debuffers, and judging by Mr. Welt Yang's skill or his light cone and how his skill interacts with it, Mr. Welt Yang is going to be a bit more on my alley personally. Pela's not bad by any means, but just she's ult dependent. She removes debuffs, which is a great bonus. But she's also a DPS character, so she's not really fulfilling the role of a Nihility debuffer to the highest degree. So that's that. Hope you guys enjoyed Pela's analysis. And if anything was super wrong, because like this one's a bit odd, isn't it? This one's a bit odd. If anything was wrong, correct me down below, and also comment what do you think about Pela, obviously. Have a great day, guys. Stay safe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out. Bye.